is the fact that there is this structure known as the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the Shekhinah. And the Mishkan is significant because it is the forerunner for the future temple in Yerushalayim, the Bet HaMikdash, which became significant for eternity. So when we talk about a central location that unites the people of Israel, it begins on this day 8. However, day 8 has unfortunately a very significant tragedy due to what the Torah calls a foreign fire. 2 of Aharon's children offer a fire that they were not requested to do, and that's what we find on page 592. There's a sin. On that day, Vayikhu bnei Aharon, the sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, they both take these fire pans, these machtot, and they place a fire on it, and then they place the incense upon it. And they bring a fire. They were not commanded to bring that fire. It was a foreign fire, not required to do so. And this is a day when you are supposed to be following orders. Right? Independence was perhaps the problem of the golden calf. They were searching for their own vehicle of spiritual worship. This is a day that they are commanded to do things and follow orders. They are inspired, and for whatever reason, they bring these for the foreign fire. They are punished in verse 2 because what happens is a fire came forth from before Hashem, in Esh Milifnei Hashem, Vatochal otam, and it consumes them. Now, how does Aharon react? This is a devastating event. Two out of his 4 children are lost on a day that was his day, his party, his celebration. So at the end of verse 3, we find Aharon being silent. Vayidom Aharon. Not a word. In other words, the pain is there. The question marks are there. Answers, of course, you don't have. Aaron is guiding us that sometimes we have to accept things with silence. The verse continues to telling us how they honored the remains of these individuals. And that is a very unfortunate ending to a significant day on our calendar. The next section, which turns into the second half of this week's portion, you'll find on page 596, chapter 11. Okay, and this is a section that's going to be presenting for us the first time the laws of kashrut, the species we eat, the species we avoid. Now, let's analyze verse 1 of chapter 11 carefully. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe. God speaks to Moshe, and usually, many times, when a teaching is mentioned, it is Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe le'emor. Here, someone else is thrown into the mix. Aharon. Fine? And then it is not just a lemor, it is not just that God spoke to Moshe, and in this case Aaron, to say over, but rather it is le'emor. Be sure, Moshe and Aaron, to teach the following information to the people of Israel, but, however, teach it, last word. In verse 1 of chapter 11, Aleihem, teach it to them. Who's the them? Throughout Torah, by Daber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and God spoke to Moshe that he should say over the information, give over the information, right? If Moshe was not given that green light to give over the information, he was not supposed to give it over. For example, Moshe is standing at his first interaction with God. He's standing there at Mount Sinai by the bush. God tells him, guess what? You are going to be the one. You're the savior. You're going to take them out of Egypt. Communicate to the people. Perform wonders. Make sticks into snakes. Hands into leprosy. Water into blood. He comes and he meets his father-in-law. right? And he says goodbye to his father-in-law, right? And you would imagine a guy wants to tell his father-in-law, you know who I am? You know, you have been looking at me like a shtigarnet for the past 60 years. I am actually the chosen one to lead the people of Israel. Well, what does he tell his father-in-law? I'm going back to Egypt to see if my family members are still alive. Like a short trip to Egypt. Why does he not share the facts with his father-in-law? So, Moshe was told to address the people of Israel. The people of Israel, due to the fact that God gave him a green light, he has the right to share it with them, the obligation to share it with them, and perhaps some assistance from above that they will not look at him like a meshuggah. On the other hand, due to the fact that he was not commanded to share with Yitro, his father-in-law, what his journey is about, so therefore, naturally speaking, just as if someone today would walk into this room and share with us the fact that God just appeared to him, we're going to go ahead and send him to a ward, so too Yitro would have thought he's crazy, meaning he was not given that green light to share the information. Therefore, it's important, when God speaks to anyone, be sure, before you share it with others, that God gives you the le'emor word. Le'emor is, you could share it with others. You have the right to do it, and with God's blessing, they're not going to consider you to be abnormal. Le'emor. But there is no need to say aleihem. It's obviously to others. So why is this first number one? Why is Aaron added to the mix? Why is he a sidekick here for Moshe to teach and educate? That's not the role of Aaron in general. And number two, what is the aleihem? Difficulties in the verse. So the rabbis tell us that the following portion was number one, taught by Aaron as well. It's a unique portion. Aaron gets reward. Reward for the fact that he was silent. He was silent when the unfortunate events occurred on that day with the passing of his children. His silence merited a reward, and his reward is that he will be part of the sharing of the teaching of the following portion. In addition, Moshe and Aaron were not to go ahead and tell the whole nation of Israel, but rather they were supposed to tell and share this fascinating teaching to aleihem, specifically to the children of Aharon, the two children, Elazar and Itamar, Banav Hanotarim, the ones that stayed alive. So therefore, what is placed here is the following. Aharon gets the privilege of teaching. The family of Aaron get the privilege of hearing it first and teaching as well, because after they are informed, they're going to teach others. And all of this in the name of the rabbis is because since Hushvud Bedmima, since they were all silent, and just as Aaron was silent during this awful and terrible, painful moment, he didn't utter a word, so therefore his reward was that in this dibur, that with this teaching and with this speech, they're all going to play a role in teaching. Kohanim are getting a very special role in teaching the following portion. What is this portion all about? Well, you want to know what to eat. You want to know what not to eat. What are kosher birds? What are the kosher species? Is sturgeon kosher? Right? Can you eat the grasshopper? Can you not eat the grasshopper? Is giraffe kosher? All these fascinating questions which we've been dealing with for so long was given to the Kohanim to teach. Why specifically, this is the question we're going to be dealing with, why specifically this portion? Torah has so many laws. What is unique about the laws of kashrut? And if you look at Rashi in verse 2, Daberu el bnei Yisrael. So this is Rashi, it's the column to the left. And he tells us here, Et kulam hishvu liyot shluchim badibur, that all of them, the family of Aaron, the two other sons and Aaron, were added to be the messengers of this teaching. Since they were hushvu b'dmima, they were silent. They were silent and accepted the justice and the judgment of God. They got to teach this portion. What's very unique about this portion? Okay, laws of kashrut. So, birds, like chicken, People eat chicken here? A chicken? Eat some chicken. Chicken's a bird, right? Fowl. Other birds that people eat, duck, right? Doves. What other?
Pigeon, quail.
Pigeon.
Quail.
Wow, ooh, fancy people here. Goose. Okay, goose. How do you define a kosher species of a bird? It's a good question. Now.
Whatever is not listed.
Okay, so now the Torah is going to list 24 species that are no good. You never had vulture or eagle, and you have not eaten owl recently, or bat, right?
Yeah. Bat.
You haven't? No, you haven't. You haven't. 24 species the Torah tells us no. And therefore, what the Torah is telling us is the following. If you could identify those 24 species, any other bird is kosher. If, big if. Correct? Now, what happens for the generations following Moshe who did not have the ability of identifying those species? So the Talmud does present, the oral tradition gives us a few signs of a kosher bird. The gizzard could come out easy. It's not a predator. You could tell that by the claw, how it splits its fingers. Ways to identify kosher birds. But then the Talmud notes that doesn't always work. And therefore, Rashi shares with us that the way we have been eating birds for the past few centuries is only through, the key word is, masoret. You have to have a tradition. You have to have a tradition. You have to have a shochet, who learned from a shochet, who learned from an earlier shochet, and they could say that this is a bird that is eaten and this one is not. That's how we eat birds. Yes?
Is the Masorah the same around the world, or are there some places where you
So
have...
obviously there are some places that were able to preserve Masoret better than other places. For example, you take Ashkenazi Jews, right? My grandfather was in Lithuania. And I know very well that he did not originate in Lithuania. He was a friend in Russia. And I know very well that if he was in Russia, so obviously before the 15th century, he was further to the west. So he's probably somewhere in Germany. And if he was in Germany, it is very, very possible that the family was at some time in Italy. And if they were in Italy, it means that before they were exiled from Jerusalem. If they were in Jerusalem, it means that before they were in Babylonia for some time. And if they were in Babylonia, I know that before they were in Egypt. Okay? And that's the short route. Now, every single time that they were exiled, and my ancestors were exiled, and I assume, well, you for sure could tell us everything about it, but every single time they were exiled, they lost things. I know very well because I've moved a little bit, right? And Miriam Escopsera made about a few books that I left in Chile, right? Because that's what happens. You leave things. You can't take everything with you, right? You try, and you hope nothing breaks, and you with your unpacking. But the reality is that some of your plants didn't go down to Neptune. Is that a correct statement?
Correct.
Okay, so it happens to plants, it happens to books, it happens to traditions. There are things that we don't know because there were specific birds that were in the Middle East. But when my ancestors, 1,800 years ago, had to go to Italy, for whatever reason, they didn't see those birds there. So the shochet had no tradition. There were grasshoppers that we used to eat that my ancestors, I don't know why, but they ate it. The Torah allowed it. So my ancestors who made it to Europe stopped eating those grasshoppers. And therefore the tradition is lost. On the other hand, the Jews from Yemen, think about the Yemenite Jews. As my ancestors went to Babylonia, Israel, Italy, Germany, right? Russia, Lithuania, South America, and that's just the beginning. The Yemenite Jews left Israel after the destruction of the first temple and stayed in Yemen until 1948. That's what happened to the Yemenite Jews. So the Yemenite Jews, number one, when it comes to pronunciations, the way they pronounce things, they have 10 exiles less than I do. So odds are that their pronunciations are 10 times better than mine. the animals and the species that my ancestors could not identify because the Litvische didn't see them in Vilnius, so the result is I couldn't eat them. The Yemenite Jew, if the grasshopper was in Israel and they had it in Yemen as well, they have a tradition. Their esrogim probably are much closer to the historical esrogim. Why? They had one exile. That's a reality that exists, and therefore there are places and there are misorot, there are traditions that the Yemenite Jews have that we don't. There are two fellows that wrote many, many articles, and they went to old Yemenite shochtim with specific birds that we don't have a tradition on, but the Yemenite shochet had a tradition. And there are those who are of the opinion, and it's very logical, that if there's a tradition from one person, he could teach it to others, and they could bring traditions back. Okay, there was in New York and in Chicago what was known as a Masoret dinner. What's a Masoret dinner? That these fellows would get together and they would present species that usually people do not eat, I think like elk and grasshoppers and different types of birds and fish that we haven't been eating for a couple for 100 years. They found a tradition. They brought the tradition back alive. It became an educational dinner and a fundraiser. So for $250, you could eat grasshoppers. You know, I would do other things with my $250, but nevertheless, the concept does exist. You could bring a masoret back to life.
So we can accept the Masorah even though our minhag has been different for
So
all
that's
those years?
that's okay. So then it becomes a little bit of a debate when you do something due to the fact that you don't have the information.
But you're saying that their tradition is more authentic.
There's no question
So
it's
if
more
it's more authentic,
There's
then
absolutely
we should all paskin like that.
logically,
me up.
they had it. We're getting excited here. So these are these questions that are in the gray area. Some people are far more traditional. And, some people are of the opinion that if they have it and they're reliable, logic dictates that you should follow them. So there's a debate and a discussion regarding these issues of Masoret. Now, Josh was one to
see
do
my
it.
quizzical look. What of the turkey and the bison?
Oh, the turkey. So, the turkey is the real question. Why is the turkey a real question? If you're supposed to have a tradition on a bird, what happens to a bird that comes from a region where there were no Jews? Logically, there would be no tradition. So logically speaking, turkey should be one of those birds where we don't have a masoret. So the question is, why do so many of us, and every Thanksgiving in the United States the question is asked, why are so many of us eating turkey? And that's a very, very good question. And what's interesting is that if you look at the poskim that deal with the issue, they are all dealing with the question not as we have identified this new bird, what is its status? No, the questions are always, we have been eating turkey for the past decade, 2 decades, 2 generations. Why are we eating turkey? That's really how the question is always presented. So they are post facto psukim, meaning people eat turkey. It's considered kosher. I should say most people, because people like Rabbi Milevsky, for example, he avoided turkey due to the question. But I think the majority of good Jews, we do eat turkey. How do we explain it? So there's a little bit of a mystery. There was one posek that wrote, it's unfortunate that he wrote this, that it must be that there was a tradition, a masoris, among the Jews of India, that turkey is kosher. Now, why specifically does he mention the Jews of India? Throughout Europe, the turkey was called the Indic, right? Why was it called? It was called the bird that came from India, and therefore it's called in Israel Tarnegol Hodu. Why is it identified with India? Well, because it originated in India, where India meaning the United States.
Oh.
In other words, remember, in the first few decades after Columbus, quote unquote, discovers America, it was viewed, and the news got back to Europe, that they found a new route to India. And items brought back from the New World earlier on were called items from India. So therefore, there was a belief that this bird is from India. So therefore, it got the name the Indike in Yiddish, right? It was an India, the bird from India. So that, of course, clarifies it because there were Jews in India. We know that. So that's how we have a Masoros. So that's what one of the poskim said, not being aware of the fact that Columbus actually discovered America and not India. But that's something that's mentioned among poskim. Mystery, eh? Yes?
Is it also true that some people, some places consider birds parrot?
Birds parrot. Interesting, you know that there is an opinion in the Talmud, a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who was of the opinion that the Torah considers birds are parrot. He was of the opinion. It is, the custom we have is to consider birds fleishiks, but it's rabbinic. The rabbinic. Now there are differences, by the way. In other words, sometimes you get questions about spoons and pots. There would be a difference if you cooked meat vis-a-vis chicken, bird, because bird is rabbinic. I don't know if there are still communities that follow his school. I wouldn't be surprised if they exist, but we accept it and it's considered, rabbinically, we consider it meat. The turkey, the logical explanation works as follows. Ashkenazim believe that the only way you eat a bird is with a tradition. There were Sephardi schools that followed identity, meaning that if they find a bird and it has all the traits of a kosher species, and it has fingers not like a predator, and it doesn't act like a predator, and it has its sections of the stomach that are peeled off easily, they could go ahead and determine a bird to be kosher even without a masoret. There is a school among Sephardi Jews. The Jews who were the Jews who brought goods overseas? It was usually Jews that originated in Spain, right? There are many, there was a book called The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. It was a popular book recently. And it points out that the maritime routes were controlled by Jews were often Marrano Jews, but Sephardi Jews. So it works as follows. The logic is that birds in the 16th century that were brought from the Americas to Europe were bought by Sephardim. They were good Torah Jews, and they ate them because they didn't have to worry about the fact that there's no Masoret in the Americas. They relied on the bird itself and how it behaves and its identity. So when they came and they made Torah Jews in Europe, they said, we consider it kosher. So the guy said at the port in Hamburg or in Amsterdam, said, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And that's how they began to eat it. That's probably the most logical of all explanations regarding that issue. But Masoret plays a very significant role. What's interesting, I wondered about the bison as well. Birds need a Masoret. Logically, animals don't need a Masoret. In other words, logically speaking, if I find a species that has its split hooves and it chews its cud, it should be kosher. That's what logic would dictate. But believe it or not, a 17th century authority, Rabbi Shapsi Cohen, he analyzed the text in his own way and he came up with the following statement. Animals as well, you should have a Masoret, which creates a little bit of a problem for species like the bison, for example. It creates a little bit of an issue there. What's interesting is that in the early 1950s, they found a cow that was very similar to the cows that we've known for centuries, but there are some differences with its shoulders and its appearance, and it's called the zebu, Z-E-B-U. It's in South America mainly, I think originated in India. So they went to the great rabbi in Bnei Brak, the Chazon Ish, and he wasn't shown the actual zebu, but perhaps pictures and descriptions of it. And he recommended that the zebu not be eaten due to the fact that we don't have a masoret. Okay, that was his recommendation. Fine. This was not a well-known event because it was a question by an individual brought to the Chazon Ish, not recorded. Fine. About 45 years later, in the mid-90s, the shechita, a lot of the meat in Israel, comes from South America. Paraguay, Argentina.
Uruguay.
Of course, the greatest meat, as my father would say, was Uruguay. Right? That's where the meat came from. Fine. And the shoftim, they're shechting there. It's good quality meat. A lot of halachically, the lungs are many of them are roaming, and the percentage of issues with their lungs is extremely low in that region. But they find an animal that's very similar to the ox or the cow, and they continue shechting it, assuming that it's kosher. And it was the zebu. And they're shipping it to Israel. And all the Torah Jews, the Chara, everyone's eating the zebu, not knowing that there's an issue. Until one day, a shochet traveled to South America, identifies the species as a zebu, remembers studying something in yeshiva years ago about a statement of the Chazon Ish, picks up the phone to Bnei Brak, and Bnei Brak said, yeah, of course, zebu, the Chazon Ish said no, and the guy told him, by the way, that meat that you have in the supermarket that has the 17 hashgachas on it? Guess what? It is a zebu. And there was a big to-do about the zebu. There was it's not Dr. Seuss, I'm telling you facts. That it was a massive to-do in Israel. What happens here? It has the traits, but we don't have a masoret. Do we take this 17th century into opinion or not? It was a big issue that existed. And the Rabbanim gave a green light not to have to kasher or anything, but they stopped with the zebu. So masoret is always an issue that the rabbis have been struggling with. There was a rabbi, one of the first rabbinic scholars who came to the Americas, was a Rabbi Yisachar Dov Ilui. Rabbi Ilui studied under the Chassam Sofer in the 1820s, 1830s. And he actually got a degree in university as well. And he came to the United States. Ilui, right? Ilui, Rabbi Ilui, Yisachar Dov Ilui. And he was a scholar, meaning rabbis in America they had, but on a level of scholarship in the middle, when we're talking about 1850, there were probably two of them that were real scholars. One of them was Rabbi Rice in Baltimore, and there was Rabbi Ilui. Rabbi Ilui got a position in a choshev Jewish community. Was what? New Orleans. It was in New Orleans. It's very fascinating in the United States. What were the big communities at that time? What? Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans. That's your Rav. In New York, that's for who's going to be in New York. That was a reality that existed then. He is there during the Civil War. He had a lot of issues. He had intermarriage issues that existed. He got into fights. There were some interesting questions. Now, among the issues he struggled with is the fact that there was a duck that people were eating there. And it was called the Muscovy duck. And the Muscovy duck was popular among the Jews. And he asked them, where's there a Masoret? So they said there's a specific shochet that says that he has a tradition. He goes to the shochet, and the shochet says, don't ask me questions, I say it's good. So he writes a tshuva to Europe, and he says that he has a feeling that he can't rely on the shochet because this shochet has a business that is open on Shabbos and sells pork. So he has a feeling that perhaps there's a guy that I don't know if I can totally rely on. That was the issue. The issue about the Muscovy duck, and there's a lot of literature about it. It was a fascinating issue. Masoret is always a to-do. It could relate to animals, like the bison, right? There are those that claim it's just a variation of the species. Others say that there is a tradition, we don't follow the shach. Different explanations are given. But what's the idea? Why exactly is there a masoret? What is it really here to teach us? For a religion to exist, we need different types of people playing different roles. Now, this is relevant for an army. If everyone would join the Marines or the Air Force, I don't think we would have a strong army. You have an army when there's diversity. And this relates to our religion as well. We need different type of people. We need people that relate to people and communicate with people on a regular basis, like community rabbis, right? A community rabbi, especially in this day and age, cannot lock himself in his office for a month straight. It's not going to work, right? Try for a day, he's lucky, but it doesn't happen. Why? Because the reality is that the way you keep the faith alive is by interacting with people. There's interaction, there's conversation, right? There's get-togethers. But the faith needs as well people. Now, we're not talking about massive communities, but you must have individuals who separate from society and are committed to keep the text and the traditions alive. Okay? Two types of people. We need it for our survival. The Rambam himself, who is extremely critical of individuals who want others to support them. The Rambam believed that it is wrong to just believe that you should just study Torah and allow others to support you. He calls it a chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of the name of God. Nevertheless, he himself tells us that if there's someone that is completely committed, he serves a purpose, and he is like the Kodesh HaKodashim, like the Holy of Holies. Now, what is the essence of the Holy of Holies? How many times would you go in when this temple was standing? Do you think people would go into the Holy of Holies for inspiration? Absolutely not. Only one person would go there once a year. It was separated from society, correct? It was separated from society, but it had its purpose. There has to be a core that is untainted. When I have a conversation, every conversation you have, any ideology that you share with others, the give and take has an impact on the philosophy. In other words, I have a complete a belief in the revelation at Sinai, correct? If I have a conversation which I've had with people that don't believe it, even though I walk away with the conversation with my faith, I have a little bit of a different angle as a result of the conversation. Now, I'm strong enough to deal with it, but I still believe that there has to be those who keep the core alive. Never to have, there's a need for a few of the holy people. We need to have, today perhaps you could call them a kollel. Every community, every large city should have 10 such people. Mm-hmm. Every large city, Yerushalayim, should have 10 people who are only sitting and learning and not interacting. Bnei Brak should have 10. I assume that both cities do, right? You should have 10 people that do not interact with the world. Asara Batlanim, they're called. Nothing. They don't interact because they keep it in the purest form. But then you need people that have dialogue. Now, the two approaches, by the way, exist with Moshe and Aaron. You know what Moshe argued? Moshe argued to God, you want me to communicate with the people of Israel? That's not my personality. I know how to meditate well. I'm a shepherd. Can you imagine a shepherd before there were cell phones, right? What would a shepherd do the whole time? Right? Not see people for weeks upon weeks. They would meditate, have truth in the purest form, never interact with a lie. Sheep don't lie. That was Moshe, and therefore when God says to him, you go and interact with the nation, he says, Lo ish dvarim anochi, I'm not a person that's communicating, that's not my nature. Who joined him? Who's his sidekick? Aharon. Aharon, throughout the years when Moshe's out there with the sheep, poor Aaron had to deal with people, right? He's there in Egypt the whole time. But he's an expert, and that's his contribution. And that's the team that keeps Torah alive. The team that keeps Torah alive is to have the purest form, and then to have a spokesman that relates to the people. What's fascinating is that when the Almighty tells Moshe, you know what? Hu yelecha lepeh, and you will be like a Elokim. In other words, when he establishes this partnership between Moshe and Aaron, Moshe is told, you are going to be like a God. Now why does the Almighty say to Moshe that the relationship you're going to have with Aharon is such that you are like a God? Well, God is in his purest form and never changes. There is no interaction that changes God. When we relate to him, we don't change him. And that's what Moshe is supposed to be. There are supposed to be those that are in the purest form. Okay? Now, the Holy of Holies has someone going in once in a while, but not the masses. You have the Aharon who goes in, who's inspired, and goes out and relates to the people. That's what we need. Now, people who interaction, people of dialogue, always express emotion, share feelings, share emotions, right? And that's how you relate to people. You cannot relate to people if you conceal 99% of your identity. You relate to people by sharing with them stories, your failures, Right? You share a failure with someone or how you were able to deal with it. They relate to it, they relate to you, you can inspire them. That was Aharon HaKohen. Aaron was always a person of conversation, always schmoozing, always talking, always sharing insights. He related to people. Ohev Shalom, Umekarav Shalom. When there were two people that would have a fight, he would go ahead and schmooze with one, schmooze with the other. Use his power of speech day in and day out to bring people together, always through speech. And what would be the greatest challenge for Aharon? To have an emotion and
Be silent.
keep it to himself, be silent. That's against his nature. That's not what Aaron's about. He has to share a feeling, express it. There's pain, he'll express it because he relates, he's an interactor. And here, unfortunately, he goes through this most painful event, and how does he react? How does he deal with it? It's against his nature. Vayidom Aharon, he's silent. Silence. Wow. You know what he merits? As a result, he becomes a player in transmitting tradition, and specifically a tradition. How are the mitzvot kept? In other words, when it comes to a Megillah, right? I can pick up a Megillah from 400 years ago, a Sefer Torah from 1100 years ago, and use it, it's 100% kosher. You know? I could go ahead and study the laws of Shabbos by just opening books from 500 years ago, from 1100 years ago, from 1600 years ago. I could keep my religion alive when it comes to other mitzvos by just books. When do I need a people? When do I need an interaction? For what mitzvah do I need to have a dialogue and a conversation and a live person who shares with me the experience? Where do I need a masoret, specifically when it comes to kashrut? And therefore, his reward for being able not to say a word at that moment of pain, which was against his nature, against his essence, the man of speech, the man of sharing feelings, for him to go ahead and be silent when he loses his children on that day, the reward is specifically this portion, and it's a portion that's all about conversation. You go to the shochet, you speak to him, right? You can't rely on a picture book. You have to go ahead and speak to the person who shows you, converses with you. He and his family are given this mitzvah that you're going to be the one lemor. You're going to be the ones to teach the people of Israel. And it is given to you specifically because you went against who you are with silent. I am giving you a reward through speech. So that explains to us how this portion really comes together. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for being part of this season. It's like an end of a semester. There should be really a paper being given in. Hamantashen. Okay. Hamantashen instead of a paper. But everyone passes. Everyone who came gets a passing grade. And our next semester begins after Pesach. That is the summer semester, right? That's when summer school begins at the end of April. Thank you so much. A good day.